Hello, and welcome to Climate Agents, Agents of Change. This is a podcast where we talk to regular people about what they think about climate change and why they think that. And I am pleased to have a friend, Steve Schlather, here today. And Steve, you can introduce yourself and tell them whatever you'd like to know about you.
Thank you, Karen. I grew up in Texas. I've lived in Springfield, Ohio. It'll be 30 years this summer that we moved there. I spent my professional life working mostly as a journalist, 27 years as a reporter and copy editor for daily newspapers in Texas and Ohio. And then 10 years I worked at the Clark County Solid Waste District to do outreach and education to promote waste reduction. I've been retired since 2018, and in retirement I devote myself to climate activism, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, and volunteering at my church and things I do with local theater, and spending an unhealthy amount of time focused on the San Antonio Spurs.
What are those?
That's a basketball team.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Some of your listeners will get that, some won't.
Okay. Well, you have to have fun, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
That's your fun in life.
Well, lately it hasn't been much fun because they're losing most of the time, but we think better days are ahead.
Okay. That's so funny. It seems to be the case of so many people who follow sports. They're so dejected some days. So we usually I just start by asking what do you think about climate change and why do you think that? But I'm also going to circle back to what you think about journalism and the media covering climate change because you have that background. But so for right now, just like your personal take on climate change, what is our current situation?
Our current situation's pretty difficult. We're putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere at a rate that is causing serious problems, and we have been doing that for a long time. And I think we've been aware of it for quite a while, and yet we don't act. There's already serious consequences occurring. Major weather disasters like floods and droughts and hurricanes have become more common and much more serious. People die from them. People suffer a lot of losses. And this is getting worse. And I think we are beginning to grasp this, and some positive things have happened in recent years. Some measures have been taken. Certainly, renewables are growing faster than anyone ever thought they would, and that's a good sign, but we need to do more. I don't know, I could say a lot more, but that's kind of the basic gist of it.
Right. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of trying to parse out what are the obstacles that are keeping humanity from really rising to this challenge. And I spend a lot of time analyzing that, trying to see what are the dynamics happening where people are aware or they don't want to be aware because they don't think there's anything they can do, and so they don't want to be made depressed. But there's no easy way for them to really take effective action or even know what effective action is.
Yeah, I think, first of all, climate change is a difficult problem for humans to get a handle on because all of us are very involved in our daily lives. We're taking care of our kids, we're buying our groceries, we're earning a living, and we're really busy doing those things. And then climate change is something it's hard to notice because even though I mentioned these kind of disasters happen more frequently and they're more serious, nonetheless, they're the kinds of things that have been around for a long time. And people go, well, that was a terrible hurricane. I hope that doesn't happen again or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's a problem that slowly creeps along and it gets worse. And also as it creeps along, people become used to things. For instance, we're having a very mild winter.
That's true.
But it doesn't seem that mild to people because we've had several mild winters in recent years. And in fact, when it got really cold a couple of weeks ago, people were like, oh, wow, it's really cold, isn't it? Actually, it was fairly normal for Ohio in January, but that doesn't feel normal anymore. Our sense of what's normal has changed, and that makes it harder to take action. And then the other big thing, I just think there's been an enormous failure of leadership in this country and in the world. There's lots of people who know better who don't do anything or actually take counterproductive action. I think there's a lot of people who know that the climate is a real problem, but because it would hurt them politically or financially, they choose to either ignore the problem or actively contribute to disinformation. I think if we had leadership that really called people to action and said, this is something we have to work on as a society, I think people would respond. But because instead we have leadership either ignoring the problem, I mean, there are some leaders who have spoken to this clearly, but they're in a minority. Most want it to go away or want to pretend that it's not happening. So people, they take their cues from their leaders and they say, well, nobody's telling me that I need to do something about this, so I'm going to go about my normal life.
I love that, and I have seen a lack of anyone calling forth really heroism, you know, like FDR did in World War II, having the fireside chats where he talked about the importance of sacrifice, of giving up, of rationing, of accepting rationing, accepting higher taxes, accepting the kind of things that had to happen to face a huge challenge. And I haven't seen that happen from on this. It's still such a big amorphous sort of subject. It's not so specific as a enemy threat.
And I think in general, it speaks to a general problem in society that we have much less sense of a common purpose than we did when I was younger. That nobody wants to call for sacrifice. Everybody wants to tell you your taxes are going to be cut or you're going to get this benefit. I mean, you remember when the 2001 terrorist attacks happened, one of the things George Bush said people should do was to go shopping. You know, it wasn't a sense of we're in this together and let's all do something, let's all pitch in. It was more of a sense of just go about your normal life and other people will take care of that.
Well, he made the connection of shopping serves the economy and you're doing your bit if you're spending money. And it was the word venal? Venal, yeah. Venal is...
Yeah. I mean, and I understand part of what he was trying to do was to say not, you know, to go about your normal lives. And I don't want to bash on Bush more than I have to. But I think he was also kind of responding to his sense of the spirit of the times was that people don't want to sacrifice, and nobody's telling them they need to. So,
No, I haven't heard anyone really calling people to heroism.
Yeah.
But even if they did, what would they do? There's no big humanities platform or conservation corps really to go and join, to go and do right away. You know, if you suddenly become convicted that this is really important and you want to dedicate your life to it, what do? You have so many, I join this group, or I go stand there with a placard, or I go take a climate science course in college. You know, what are my choices? Yeah. I try to invent the next greatest energy source, you know. So how about the media? I mean, they don't really educate the public. I just see them more as shocking us. They shock us periodically.
Yeah, I don't think the media's done very well. I think it's an issue that's hard for the media to get a hold of. I mean, this has been true for a long time. When I was a young journalist, even we talked about this, that the media is good at disaster stories, crime stories, and other things, and features and so forth, and just telling you kind of day-to-day events. But kind of getting a hold of long-term trends is more difficult to do because it takes a lot of explaining, and readers don't have patience for that. And it's even worse in a digital world where you kind of immediately know how many people are reading a story by how many hits you get. And if a story doesn't get enough hits, then it gets lowered in the profile or whatever.
So then it's less likely to be read.
Yes, exactly. So it's, I mean, you can kind of stress the disaster angle of climate change, and you can get hits that way. So there's some things you can do, and some media outlets have done great work on this. Particularly Inside Climate News, which is an online source that's totally devoted to climate change and related subjects, has done really well.
I can't remember if that's the one I joined or not, but I remember one that I tried for a while, and it was just too overwhelming. I mean, I'm studying this stuff all the time anyway, but there was a news source that was all on a climate thread, and it was just so much every day and so sad every day that I couldn't take it.
Well, I subscribe to their weekly digest. So I only get it once a week, and then I look at it and I read what I'm interested in, and I'll let the rest go. So it's more manageable for me.
Do they summarize some scientific studies? Because I think those are the hardest things for me to keep up with, is the latest scientific studies or conclusions that are coming out. Do they go there?
Sometimes. I mean, I think they're more into things that are happening to people and in government and so forth.
So the other
the other thing about it too is, as far as the media is, that has to be said, is the media largely is funded by advertisers, and there's not a lot of advertisers who really have skin in the game for addressing climate change. I mean, obviously maybe solar panel companies and people like that, but in general, if you're being funded by Exxon, that doesn't encourage you to take a long, hard look at climate change. I mean, most media companies will resist outright censorship, but if there's not, a driving reason to address a subject, and your advertisers don't like it, it doesn't encourage you.
Well, I was told by a meteorologist that she was not allowed to connect the dots and mention the connection to climate change. But that was 7 or more years ago. But it was, I said, why aren't you telling people where these things are coming from? And she said, I can't.
Yeah. I mean, I think a station would justify that in a couple of ways. One is that people don't want that level of detail. They just want to know whether or not it's going to rain tomorrow. And that, secondly, it depresses people, and then they'll watch another station.
Yeah, they'll just turn away.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some truth to both of those things. That's not totally irrational. Yeah. Now, given the stakes, it still is something we should pay more attention to. But it goes back to this whole thing of climate change is a hard thing for humans to wrap their heads around. And there's lots of different ways they can rationalize saying, I'm not going to worry about that, or that's not my problem.
I think it's also hard for people to learn about it if they're starting from scratch, because you can get a bunch of articles or you can watch a bunch of newscasts or something, but there's not a step-by-step, unless you go take a course. You're not really in a step-by-step curriculum where it unfolds in a logical manner and builds on the concepts so that you can really understand it. Because I've been shocked to find out that people, well, not shocked, because I was there myself. I didn't understand that the carbon dioxide molecule has this property of being able to absorb heat and transmit it to the air around it. And that, I just think if more people understood that, they would not say these stupid things like, oh, carbon dioxide's good. It's not. They're treating it like a poison, but it's good. They don't understand the dynamics at work. Yeah.
Although, I think the information is out there. It's not that hard to find if you really want to. There's some concepts that are difficult to grasp, certainly, but it's not rocket science. It's science, but it's not. The basics are not that difficult.
But some of it isn't logical, isn't like intuitively logical. I find that's interesting.
Yeah.
But I want to back up to what you said, though, about how some of these bigger corporations don't have skin in the game as far as wanting to educate people about climate change or wanting to actually decelerate our emissions. But how can we get through to them? Because how can they not care about their future or their children's future or the future of humanity or the future of civilization? How can they not care about protecting the things they might say they value, like a Van Gogh? That whole thing was really important to me. I thought that was a really good action, and other people didn't. But the idea that you say you love these things and want to protect them, but these actions of the green lighting more pipelines and stuff is not doing that.
Yeah.
How do we get through to them?
People are good at rationalizing things that they perceive of as being in their interest. And another thing that's happened, along with our society having less common purpose, is I think we've become much more focused on things instant gratification. Corporations are judged by their quarterly returns, not even by a year's time frame, much less a 20-year time frame. And that's what they're focused on, is enhancing shareholder value from one quarter to the next. And when you look at it that way, there really isn't a reason to address climate change, because that would hurt shareholder value in the next quarter. Now, it would certainly be better down the road, but down the road is not my problem if I'm a middle manager or even a high manager.
Right. So that's really discouraging. So that's one that I would put in the column of big obstacles. Just that whole process, that whole structure would be one of the big obstacles of why we're not addressing this emergency. And that's another thing people don't really realize, is why it's an emergency.
Yeah.
Why is it an emergency right now?
Yeah, because it doesn't feel that way right now. And it's hard to explain to people that if we don't take action right now, the emergency will hit them, and by then it will be too late. Or I don't want to say too late, but it'll be extremely, extremely difficult to reverse things. So
I try to explain it that right now is when we're creating the conditions under which the emergency will unfold in the future.
Right.
So rather than saying like, oh, the world's going to end in 2 years or 3 years or something, but it's more like, no, we're setting in place conditions that can't be changed later. And if we don't move fast, those conditions will persist for like 10,000 years. It takes that long, unless we have some magic thing that's going to scrub our atmosphere.
The analogy I sometimes use is, if you're in a car and you're going down a hill and it keeps getting steeper going downhill and you keep accelerating, if you apply your brakes early as you're going downhill, it's fairly easy to bring the car to a stop. If you wait till you're halfway down the hill, it's really difficult. You have to really slam the brakes on. You may burn them out. You may flip the car over. You may do other kinds of damage. And of course, if you wait until you're near the bottom of the hill, you're probably just going to crash, and there's nothing you can do at that point. I think we're still somewhere in the middle process, but we need to start and we've hit the brakes a little bit, but we need to hit them harder.
See, I think we're accelerating down the hill. I mean, we're having wars everywhere, and those things are really accelerate emissions, and put more money into military, which puts more money into fossil fuels, which puts more money into things that are causing emissions, death, explosions. All that stuff is bad for the environment, and I just feel like we're going. I don't see much applying the brakes. So.
Well, I do think the renewable industry is growing very fast. I think the Inflation Reduction Act was a real effort to make a difference in the arc of what's happening on climate.
Good.
I would have liked to have seen more done, but within our political system, I think that was about as good as we could do at this point. Yeah. And I think if everything that's in that act stays in place and it keeps moving, it will help to really change the arc of what's going on. I mean, I've read that other countries have seen the U.S. passing these kind of incentives and programs, and they've started to do more because they worry that we'll get ahead of them on these on the promotion of renewables and so forth. So, it's having some sort of effect, a ripple effect, as it were.
Well, my friends in Europe say they are way out ahead of us.
Yeah.
They said, "Don't worry, we'll save the world because you can't, because your government's too messed up." But that's what I'm wondering. Like, why can't we fix? Everyone worries about corruption in government and worries about the inefficiency in our government. But why can't we fix that? Because we're supposed to be a shining light, a beacon of democracy, and we just can't seem to make that work. We try.
Well, I think the influence of money is a big part of the problem,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of people who have a lot of influence who don't necessarily have the best interests of the rest of us at heart. And, our system just has a lot of inherent flaws in it. It was designed in the 18th century
Yeah.
to make it hard for government action to happen because they feared absolutism, and probably justifiably so. But in our day and time, it makes it hard when you have an actual emergency that people don't recognize. It makes it hard to take action on that because, we have all these checks and balances, and they do check us from doing things.
That's a really good analysis. Absolutism, meaning like they were afraid of some sort of monarchy situation coming back up.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But they also feared the dictatorship of the majority. If you read the Federalist Papers,
Yeah.
they were concerned about that. And maybe in their time, when the majority of people were illiterate,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that was a rational fear in that day. But I don't think that's all that rational now. I think people can understand things if they have good leadership. So,
We need someone to do those fireside chats and
Yeah.
really bring people along and educate them and get them all on board. Yeah. So you've shared a lot about, I appreciate what you've shared about what you thought. And I like your analysis too. I know that you're pretty involved with a local group, and you want to tell us about that?
yeah, I'm involved with Citizens Climate Lobby, which is a national organization, and we have a local chapter, which I started. And I've been doing this for about 10 years because basically at the start of 2013, I made a New Year's resolution that I was going to find a way to be meaningfully involved in the climate crisis. I guess I was just having a feeling that someday I might have grandchildren, and they would someday ask me, Grandpa, why did our society not do anything about this issue? And then they would say, and what did you do, Grandpa? And I guess I wanted to be able to say, maybe I should have done more, maybe I should have done things sooner, but at least I did something where I tried. And so at the beginning of 2013, I started looking around, and I did some different things. And eventually, there were two things that really frustrated me, or things that I really wanted to see happen in any group I joined. One is I saw a lot of groups talking about the climate crisis who were totally into disaster orientation. Like this is disasters coming toward us. Everything's going to be terrible. It's all bad. And there was, there's a reason to say those things, but it depresses people. So you need to give people, here's something effective you can do. Here's a possible solution, or here's a suite of solutions. And I wanted to find an organization that gave its members things to do, that you weren't just writing a check or going to a demonstration and holding a
Yes.
sign.
Yes.
And those things have their place,
Yes.
but I wanted something more concrete. I used to be involved, this is where I met my wife, was in Amnesty International, where you had local groups that wrote letters on behalf of prisoners of conscience, where you had something specific to do that made an impact. And I found this organization that fulfilled those two needs. Citizens Climate Lobby works through local chapters and trains them to pursue positive relationships with members of Congress and other influencers to try to get them to do things, effective things on the climate crisis. And they had a specific solution they were working toward, the carbon fee and dividend, which I really liked because it always seemed to me that the main way to address getting away from fossil fuels was to make them more expensive. As I've noticed before, when you had big jumps in gas prices, the sales of cars that got better gas mileage would go up, and the sales of SUVs and things like that would go down. So that influences people. Price influences people's behavior. And that's, you need to make it where the things that are feeding the climate crisis become more expensive. And the carbon fee does that by making fossil fuels progressively more and more expensive. But the problem with that, of course, is it's very hard on low income and working class folks to have to pay more for energy. And that was, the dividend was an answer to that, because everybody gets a dividend that helps offset the costs of higher fuel prices and other higher prices. And there's still an incentive to change your behavior because the prices are going up, but you're not, made desperate by these actions. So I like the fact that they had a practical solution and that they involved people. So I just said, I'd been to the climate reality training, and I'd met a couple of people who were involved in CCL there. So then I started reading up on it. I liked what I read, and I went. CCL still has this. They have every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, there's an informational call. You have to go to the website and sign up in advance. And then it was a phone call when I first did it. Now it's a Zoom call. But when I first did it, I was on the phone for 45 minutes or so, listening to someone describe how CCL worked and what their strategies were and their values. And when I hung up, I said, this is for me. Mm-hmm. And I've been involved ever since.
Every Wednesday at what time?
8 o'clock Eastern Time.
8 Eastern.
CitizensClimateLobby.org is the website. And if you go there, you go to the menu that says Take Action. And one of the actions you can take is to sign up for the informational session. Mm-hmm. And the other people can do is talk to me, and I can tell them about Citizens Climate Lobby. We have a chapter in Springfield. Lately, we've been cooperating more with the Dayton chapter and doing things together, which kind of gives us more people to do things. It's, and it's been very rewarding and at times very frustrating to work on this, because it's hard to get people involved. There have been times we have monthly meetings, and there have been times we've had the monthly meeting, and it's just me and Nancy looking at each other. The pandemic, ironically, was good for us because CCL's used Zoom since 2016. So I already knew how to do a Zoom meeting when the pandemic started. So we transitioned seamlessly to doing meetings over Zoom. Mm-hmm. And that expanded the people who could attend. We started having people come from Oxford, Ohio. It's an hour and a half away, but they were in our congressional district. Mm-hmm. And so now we meet with the Dayton folks over Zoom, and we'll have 15 or so people come to a meeting now. Mm-hmm. So it's, and we've just gotten some good energy going. Yeah, it's still a difficult issue to work on, but I think we're doing what we can.
Well, the activities involve making appointments and going to talk to our congressional representatives and senators, right?
Right.
And I know that CCL people usually, dress up and they're very businesslike, and they're very respectful of the representative's time. And they're appreciated for that. They know that they're, someone meeting with them knows they're not going to be yelled at, or they're not going to be badgered, or they're going to be spoken to respectfully and educated in a way that doesn't push them, maybe stretches them a little bit beyond where they're at, but doesn't force or get mean or in any way.
We have a saying in CCL that you should approach every meeting with a member of Congress, a staffer, whoever you're meeting with an attitude of respect and appreciation for that other person. Mm. And if you can't find it in your heart to truly have that, don't participate in the meeting. Mm. And we make it a point, every meeting we try to start off by saying something we appreciate about the person that we're meeting. Some meetings you have to work really hard to find that point of appreciation, but usually you can. Uh-huh. And extends to a lot. And then there was something else I was going to make that point, but now I lost it. Sorry.
Oh, well, it's bipartisan, right?
Right, exactly. And I'll be honest with you, the big majority of people involved in CCL probably are Democrats, but we do have Republicans. And conservatives, independents, Republicans, they're all welcome. Basically, anyone who's interested in taking effective action on the climate crisis is willing as somebody we're willing to work with, whatever their persuasion.
And I just find it's a very cool group of people.
Yeah, I
Very
find that
fun
too.
people, very knowledgeable people, very, very good group.
Yeah, I try to go most years to the annual conference in Washington, D.C., and it's really uplifting. There's a lot of great people there, Amnesty International was like that too. Like I met my wife there, and if I were looking for a wife now, I'd probably find her at CCL.
Okay. Well, how close to getting a carbon fee and dividend do you think we are?
We're not close.
Not that close.
We're closer than we were 10
Yeah.
years ago.
Uh-huh.
People considered the idea. I mean, one of the things that happens is things like the Inflation Reduction Act happen, and it's a good thing. But also for some people, it's like, okay, now we did something on that. Now we're going to go do something else. And I think, you've done the En-ROADS simulator, and you do the En-ROADS simulator, and you find that the single greatest action you can take, if you're just going to take one action, is to put a price on carbon. And that's one thing the carbon fee does.
It's a very high leverage point.
Yeah. And so that's something we still push for it. And I think it's going to happen. I think it needs to happen sooner than it has. But, right now our political system is it's hard to get anything done.
I know these campaigns, like like half of their term they're running for office.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Like, when do they do the work? we're always campaigning anymore.
Yeah.
They've made it like a big Hollywood contest or something.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you enter an election year, as we just have, and nobody wants to do anything. Except what things that absolutely have to be done. And even that, I mean, they're having trouble getting a budget passed, So to do something that's really big, like a carbon fee and dividend, is just out of the question.
Well, that's discouraging. Especially for a while there, I thought we had a majority, but somehow that wasn't leveraged. So now I think both sides are equally entrenched with the fossil fuel money and aren't going to take action. So it's interesting how we can leverage that. I don't know what leverage we have anymore.
Yeah, I don't either. But, I just think we have to keep working at it.
Well, I do call. I call and I go online one day and put a comment on their website, and then on my reps, Sherrod Brown, and then I the next day I call and talk to a staffer, and then the third day I call after hours and leave a message.
Yeah. Because one of the things you used to hear from congressmen and senators was, well, I never hear from my constituents, but this is something that concerns them. And that was one of the things we thought as CCL that we would try to address, is that we'd have these meetings, we'd make phone calls, we'd send emails, and we'd let them know that there are people who really want them to take action. So they can't honestly say that they never hear from us. So it's a big lift still to try to move our political system, but we feel we have to try.
I know that staffers sometimes just take hash marks
Right.
for how many calls they've gotten and in what category or what side the person's on. Does CCL know any of that? Do they know? Well, they know how many calls have been made. Do they know, like, what the statistics are for, say, Sherrod Brown receiving calls saying they're concerned about climate? Or how do we...
I know when the Inflation Reduction Act was in the balance, there were a lot of calls, thousands of calls and emails, and CCL was one of the big drivers of that. There were other organizations were involved, certainly, and I can't remember specifics, but I do remember hearing senators say that, that it probably didn't sway them from what they believed, but it maybe gave them conviction to keep going in the direction they were going and helped them to know that there were people who were going to support this. So, yeah, and I think a lot of it does come down to hash marks, like you say. But that's why it's good just to call. And we tell people, you don't have to make a big speech when you call. You just have to make it clear what you want them to do, Do you want them to support a carbon fee and dividend? Do you want them to vote for the Inflation Reduction Act? Do you want them to support keeping the climate smart aid money in the current farm bill? That's something we're working on right now. Well, not the Farm Bill's being renewed, and there's money, $20 billion in the Farm Bill to promote climate smart agricultural and forest practices. And some people have talked about taking that money and reallocating it. So we're calling to say, don't do that. You got to keep this money in there. Not only is it good for the environment, it's good for the farmers. It provides another source of income for them, and it helps them to be more productive on their farms and their ranches. So we're making that pitch, and then we're hoping. And that kind of thing, I think you can have some influence on. It's hard to get all the way to carbon fee and dividend, but if you're talking about a provision in a bill that has to pass because everybody wants to support farmers, and they're going to work that out, and they're going to pass a farm bill. To try to keep that provision in the farm bill is something where people speaking up can have an influence. And CCL's good at identifying those kind of leverage points. It is the individuals like me and you and the other members of our group and people who are friendly to us who do the actual calls and so forth. But we do have a national staff, and they help to identify those kind of leverage points. Like, this bill is coming down the pike, and February is a good time to address that, so let's do that now. That's going to be our action for February, and we get out there and we do that. So the national staff plays a key role in giving us the research and the strategy that helps to address those kind of things.
That's good. I hope, does membership dues help to support those people?
Absolutely. It's a nonprofit, so people they get some grants and things like that, but people's donating makes a big chunk of what keeps the organization going. And like I said, I wanted to be involved in an organization that did more than just ask for money, but if I believe in an organization, I do give money, and I give to CCL.
And it sounds like it's really worth it.
Absolutely.
Really worth it. I mean, being in this field for a while, I've seen all that CCL has accomplished. I think it really has moved the needle. It's helped in so many ways to even raise the consciousness about climate, because it's talking to people in a different way. So, and as you said, those other things are necessary. They're part of it too. If people are standing out with placards or, doing a lot of petitions and other things that they're doing, but this is a necessary component too.
And other organizations are necessary too. Some people will tell me, I don't want to be respectful and appreciative. I want to be in their face. And there's a time and a place for that too. And if that's your style, go forth and do that. But I do think we need to have more people being respectful and appreciative and talking calmly to our representatives to let them know that there's a path for them to move. And that's the space that CCL occupies.
And just circling back to the Farm Bill, OFA, the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, also has put a ton of work into this and into getting those kind of provisions passed in the Farm Bill and into it. And I just hope that groups are collaborating together that are working on some of the same things. And they pointed out that some of the things that you talked about, the provisions for better farming, are sometimes simple, like just don't leave your soil bare over the winter. Make sure you plant a cover crop, and that helps to sequester a lot more carbon and keep the health of the soil. So some of those things need to be in there because then they have incentives to do it right.
And they have technical assistance to tell them that this is what needs to be done. There's a thing in the Inflation, I think it was in the Inflation Reduction Act, but it's definitely a program where they have what they call technical support providers. And these are people who tell farmers and ranchers about climate smart practices that can be beneficial to them as well as to the environment, like having a cover crop. And one of the things we worked on last year was that the TSPs, as they're called, were being used, but not as much as they should have been. And part of that was the compensation that was provided for them was not as much as probably should have been. And so that's what we were arguing for, is let's raise the compensation for the TSPs, and let's make the certification process easier, because that was a barrier for some people to become a TSP.
TSP, say it again?
Technical support provider. And it's specifically about
Yeah.
agricultural and forestry practices.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's the sort of thing where the staff's good at identifying, here's something that can make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to solve the problem, we know that, but it's going to make a difference, helps to move the needle. And it's kind of a little bit arcane, but it makes a difference, and it's something we can have an influence on because it is kind of arcane. And so let's push on this.
Mm-hmm. And I bet the people who normally write these things they're not used to having so much citizen input. They're not used to having citizens actually pay attention and know what they've written in this hundreds and hundreds of page bill.
Yeah.
Somebody's paying attention. I guess we better write it correctly. I guess one more thing I wanted before we end is just I know that you have been an actor. Yes, and just talking about the role of the arts and acting, how that's a whole different way of communicating, and I think it's really important. In fact, I've realized that some of the best communicators now are comedians, those stand-up comedians who tell stories, but they're also shaping people's opinions. By telling these stories, they're shaping what people think about things. I mean, I think it started way long ago with the Tonight shows that were on. People were getting their politics through comedy. Mm-hmm. But now it's almost like people are actually going to comedians to learn things.
One of the things I noticed, it's one of the things that told me that people's minds was changing, and this was I saw a lot more references to global warming in the comics. And not dismissive either, but kind of saying that, hey, this is really happening. So it's, and things like that, I don't think they change people's minds, but it indicates that people are willing to think about something, because a comic artist is not going to put something like that in unless they think their audience will tolerate it. Mm-hmm. So it's hard. I've never seen a theater piece, a play that really addressed climate change in an effective way. I think it's hard to do that in that setting. Not saying it can't be done, and I think it will be done as time goes by, but I haven't seen it yet. So.
Oh, just wait. I'm going to use that studio over there, and we're going to do some skits.
Yeah, I've thought of a couple myself, but I haven't.
My favorite is the Denier Whack-A-Mole.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank you so much for being with us here today and for sharing. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we end?
Just thank you for doing this. I respect and appreciate you and what you're doing. And let's just keep moving forward.
Thank you. Much respect and appreciation for you, too.
Thanks.
And your dedication over the years. I've seen that. I really respect that. So I want to thank everyone for listening to Climate Agents, Agents of Change.